千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So as we talked about last time, this is a short chapter. And initially, because it's 8 lines, one might think that it's basically 4 sets of 2 lines each. But when we looked deeper, we realized that it actually was not the case, that this was a rare instance where we had the first 3 lines grouped together in the first section, followed by the middle 2 lines forming the middle section, and then 3 lines for the concluding section. And previously, we worked our way down line by line and got to line 6, as you can see there. Line 6 is about contentment. So there's a lot of stuff that led up to it. Let me just quickly summarize what we talked about, starting from the first section being lines 1, 2, and 3. And you can see in the translation that it's all about comparing the self to fame, comparing the self to wealth, and then contemplating gain or loss. So let me isolate the first section and then talk about what we had discussed. So we know that in the first section, Lao Tzu is basically asking us to compare some concepts. The first one is about comparison of fame and the self. The pursuit of fame, meaning wanting to become more well-known, and also wanting to gain in terms of your population, wanting to be seen in a positive light. So that's what the character means, Ming. And Shen, the self, has implications, both the physical body and the non-physical aspects of yourself. The way you think, the way you interact with other people, your favorite things, all the intangibles, all the things that are associated with your spirit. So what is more important, the self or the pursuit of fame? Then with the second line, Lao Tzu is applying a similar question, but this time toward hoard, which means goods or merchandise, but here it's actually extrapolated to mean wealth, material wealth. So compare yourself with the acquisition of wealth, with the chase for material things. Which is greater? Which is the more important of the two? Now, we can take an educated guess that Lao Tzu will want us to think about this deeply and then conclude that nothing is worth the damage to the self or to one's relationships. So what about the acquisition and the loss of things like reputation and material wealth? Well, that's line 3, gain or loss. Lao Tzu is asking us to compare the two, gain or loss in terms of Ming, which is fluctuations in reputation and popularity. When you are extremely well-known, well-liked, that would be at the maximal point of Ming. When people ignore you, when people don't have a great opinion of you, that would be the polar opposite of that. So which is more painful, to gain or to lose? Lao Tzu is asking us to think carefully about this, to think deeply without feeding us with the answers. Then There's also the gain or loss in terms of hoard, goods, merchandise, increase or decrease in material things and monetary resources. So this basically is the thrust of the first section. And to make it easier for us to understand, what we talked about previously was to formulate this matrix, this table, to help aid in comprehension. So down the left-hand side, you'll see all the concepts noted, the fame, the health in terms of your physical body, wealth, and then self in terms of your character, values, honor, dignity, etc. Then we have what happens when you gain them, what it means, when you are gaining in terms of fame, or health, or wealth, or the self, and what happens in a loss scenario. Now, we can easily single out some of the cells in this table to highlight the question that Laozi was asking. For instance, when it comes to the gaining of reputation, prestige, position, social position, climbing the social ladder, getting ahead of the competition, if you gain in that, is it worth the suffering in terms of neglecting your health? If you compromise your health to climb the social ladder, is it worthwhile? That's the question. Now, that's only one of the multiple questions that Laozi was asking. So this is just a quick way to illustrate where in this table those questions will be shown. And then the other question is, hey, what about the accumulation of money, wealth? What if you sacrifice your mental and spiritual well-being in order to accumulate your wealth? Would it be worthwhile? So these are deep questions that Laozi is asking with only 3 lines in the first section. Now there's a lot more that he wants to say about that, and that takes us into the second section. So we were able to explore this pretty completely. We focused on line 4, excessive love must lead to great spending. Great spending in this context means that there's a heavy price to pay. So these 2 lines, line 4 and line 5, are warnings about life from Laozi. So then the first one is about attachments, obsessions, how we can get into certain things way too much, and that's what extracts the heavy price. So the example that I used last time was the tale of the horse lover. And then we talked about the symbology in the story, where the horse isn't really a horse, it's really about attachments in your life. So I would like to ask everyone to take a step back from the story and think about the story as a whole. It is describing a process that begins in the story with an obsession, obsessive love, obsessive attachment. That's the beginning of the process. Then that attachment becomes toxic. It becomes something that affects life in a negative way. So then in the case of the horse lover, his mind, his thinking was dominated by thoughts of his obsession. And as he's pouring care and attention and love upon the horse, the next part of the pattern is the turning point, the discovery that although he has invested all this emotion into the subject of his attachment, the horse doesn't actually care. So this is part of the pattern where no matter what it is that you are attached to, whatever hobbies may have turned into obsessions, that thing that you obsess over, it doesn't care. It cannot care. It's not a human being that can return your love. So more than anything else, this is where you can see that Tao is really about the study of life patterns. And this is the reason why the story of the horse lover can be widely applicable across the board to cover every kind of obsessive human behavior in life. So please keep that in mind. This is not just about the people who love horses, etc. The horse isn't really a horse. This is symbolic in nature. This is talking about symbology. This is not condemning the people who love horses or any other kind of animals. This is talking about what happens when that love goes overboard into obsessive behavior. So then what next? Well, we then also, in our recap, we talked about contentment. We continued on to get into a discussion about knowing contentment. And when you look at this chapter as a whole, you're going to see, as we will emphasize later on today, contentment is one of the two main pillars of this chapter, the two main points. The story that I used to illustrate contentment was about a historical figure. And hopefully you were tuning in or looking this up on YouTube where the story is posted. Hu Jiushao, and could also be, the name could also be pronounced Hu Jiushao. Hu Jiushao was the historical figure who pointed out in discussion with his wife about the sources of contentment that he felt, that he strongly felt was present. And here, once again, this being a story of the Tao tradition, you're not meant to take everything literally, but to extrapolate from that, look for life patterns, and extrapolate it into your life. So then what I offered last time was to do the same thing, look around at your life through the lens of the Tao to see what are the sources of contentment that are already present in your life. What are these sources that you can be grateful for, that you can appreciate? So the examples that I gave, number one, potential for betterment. Just by the fact that you are alive, there are possibilities that are opened up where you can make things better for yourself. No doubt about that. Abundant resources. Number two, this one was actually something that I think, caused quite a bit of reflection. This one resonated with some of you, and it is quite easy to point out that one of the things that we can point to as an abundant resource for all of us is access to information. I mean, look at what we are doing now. We're taking advantage of technology, taking advantage of the internet. It's giving us unprecedented access to information. Human beings throughout history never had such easy access to sources of information, of knowledge, even in some cases, wisdom. And number three, I want to emphasize as well, as I pointed out last time, this is not something that you can say for everybody. This is something that we can say for ourselves. Everybody who is in this gathering today, plus everybody who tunes in, who calls up one of the YouTube presentations, the recordings that is on YouTube right now, you have an affinity with the Tao. That is, nothing happens quite by accident. You are able to connect with this or a presentation recorded on YouTube for a particular reason, and that is because you have an affinity to the Tao, even if the people around you don't have the same affinity. What I mean is, when you talk to your friends, loved ones, your family, relatives, etc., and you mention something about the Tao, it may go over their heads. They may not know what you're talking about, and they may feel a lack of interest. So when you have the interest and you have the opportunity to be in touch with the Tao, that is something that can bring, I think, a lot of appreciation, a lot of gratitude, and contentment. So the bottom line is the following. When you have contentment in your life, you can master the art of being grateful for everything. Everything has a good reason for being in your life. On the other hand, when you lack contentment, everything seems off, and you have plenty of reasons to be upset. You can point at many things as annoying, as getting under your skin, as things that you are upset about, and you can list numerous justifications for feeling that way. And who can argue with you? Those are your feelings. But this is the difference that contentment can make in your life. And this concludes the recap for what we had discussed previously, quite a bit, as I'm sure you can see. Now we are ready to forge ahead and talk about what is basically the last 3 lines of this chapter, the last 3 lines. But just like the first 3 lines, the concluding section of chapter 44 is rich with meaning. There's a lot to explore. So let's do that. So let's take a look at line 6. Line 6 says, is translated as knowing contentment avoids disgrace. I do want to focus on the last part of it, avoids disgrace. That's kind of an odd expression if we say it in English. So I want to talk about what that actually means. Why would it be that when you know contentment, you avoid disgrace? So then the reverse is that if you are not content, if you don't know the joy of contentment, then you are disgraceful. You are a disgrace. What does that mean? And why would Lao Tzu frame it in that way? So first of all, Lao Tzu is being pretty specific about this. He's specifically pointing out that being discontent or greedy is a disgrace due to the way he thought about life in general. So I want to highlight this in order to kind of get you to think about life the way that Lao Tzu does. So what do I mean by that? Well, think about it in the opposite way. What if you are able to live in accordance with the Tao, which means you live with simplicity? Living simply in accordance with the Tao is the graceful way of life. It's a way to sail through life seemingly without effort, without struggle, a graceful way to live. So then the opposite of that you can extrapolate is that, well, if you live with complexity, not in accordance with the Tao, contrary to the Tao, well, that would be the ungraceful way to live. That would be clumsy, clunky, everything would get in the way. So here's what it is. Wanting more than you need, on the other hand, will add complexity and take you in the opposite direction, contrary to the Tao. Thus, a life of disgrace instead of a graceful life. So that is the way that Lao Tzu thought about life in general. Now, I want to relate a story that I think is perfect for illustrating the disgraceful part of it. It's not just disgrace, it's even verging into a sense of horror when you are not able to live in accordance with the Tao. It's also a good opportunity for us to switch gears a little bit. And instead of the little known stories that I sometimes tell from the Eastern tradition, we can switch it around and then use a fairly well-known story from Western tradition. And what I hope to illustrate, whenever I do this, whenever I bring in stories from the Western tradition, I'm hoping to accomplish one objective. I'm hoping to illustrate that the same patterns in life manifest for all humanity. And they do that across geographical or cultural barriers. It doesn't matter where you live, what language you speak, what your cultural background may be. These life patterns are the same because we're all human beings. So life pattern is kind of the underlying theme today. As I tell the story, let me ask you to pay attention to the underlying patterns that apply, not just to the characters in the story, but to our own lives as well. So here's the story that I call The King's Touch. Once upon a time, in ancient Greece, there was a king who ruled the kingdom of Phrygia. This king, well, he lived in luxury. He had this great castle surrounded by rose gardens. He lived in this great castle with his beloved daughter, the beautiful princess. The king reveled in his wealth, and his favorite thing, his favorite pastime is that he would often spend a lot of time counting his gold coins. As he was counting the gold coins one by one, he thought that he loved gold more than anything else in the world. One day, in his rose garden, the king found a satyr. A satyr is a half man, half goat creature. This creature, he recognized immediately, was actually Silenus. Silenus was a companion, a friend, a teacher to Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of wine, and Dionysus also was known by the name Bacchus. So this creature, Silenus, seemed lost and tired. So the king had him brought into the palace, lavished him with hospitality. So after a few days of feasting, drinking, resting, he had Silenus taken back to Dionysus, the god of wine. So the god had been worried about Silenus and was thankful to the king for the kindness in taking care of his friend. And Silenus was also the god's mentor as well. So the god Bacchus, or Dionysus, to express his gratitude, he said to the king, "You may ask me whatever you wish, and it shall be granted unto you." He granted the king a wish. So the king, happy about this opportunity, reflected upon his favorite thing in life, gold. Despite the luxury in which he lived, no amount of precious jewels or splendid finery and luxuries seemed like enough. He really just needs more gold. More gold was what he was really after. So he said to the god, "I wish that everything I touch turns into gold." Upon hearing this, Dionysus was a little skeptical, and he asked the king, "Are you sure about that? You should probably think about your wish carefully." But the king insisted, "No, no, that's what I want. Gold is what I want. Gold and more gold." So Dionysus, the god, thought, well, I did promise that I would grant him whatever, so I'm going to go ahead and grant this wish. So the king was ecstatic. Back in his palace, he turned to all of his possessions. At his lightest touch, the palace walls transformed into solid walls of gold. He extended his arm, touching a small table. That small table also immediately turned into gold. He touched a chair. He touched a door. He touched his bathtub. They all turned into gold. So he ran around in a frenzy, laughing to himself, handling each item, everything he could get his hands on. Soon, the palace was full of gold. The king's laughter echoed off the golden walls. Gold. I love it. Then, hungry from all that running around, the king looked for something to eat. He saw a bunch of grapes, so he picked it up to eat them, but he almost shattered his teeth biting down on the gold. The fruit had turned to gold at his touch just as quickly as everything else that he had touched, so he couldn't eat that. So then he tried a loaf of bread. It too hardened into gold and was not edible, did nothing for his hunger. So he was so exhausted, he decided to lie down in his bed. At his touch, his bed turned to gold. His plush pillows had also transformed into solid gold, giving him no rest at all, hurting the back of his head. He cried out in frustration. I can't eat anything for my hunger. I can't get any rest for my fatigue. What is going on? Now, hearing cries of frustration, his daughter, the beautiful princess, entered the room to see what was wrong with her father. The king was happy to see the beloved princess and hugged her, but then looked at her with horror upon the realization that he had frozen her into a golden statue. So this was when he finally realized his mistake. The king realized that what he loved more than anything in the world was not actually gold, was actually his daughter. His daughter was the most important thing. So he begged Dionysus to undo the golden touch. What he thought was a blessing was actually a curse. Dionysus, shaking his head, thinking, I told you so. He took pity on the foolish king and decided to tell the king that, well, if you wish to undo it, you have to go wash your hands in the river Pactolus. So the king followed this instruction, went to the river, washed his hands. He saw gold draining from his fingertips. And this, as the god had promised, had the effect of undoing the power that he had been granted before. When he returned to the palace, everything had turned back to normal. That is the end of the story of the king's touch. And the king, as you would probably guess, is King Midas. This was the story of King Midas from Greek mythology. It's where we get our expression, the Midas touch. Now, this story, as you can tell, was meant to be a cautionary tale. In other words, the foolish king, King Midas, do not be like Midas. Be careful what you wish for. But nowadays, people perhaps don't really recall the original intent of the story, that it was a cautionary tale. So the Midas touch, the expression, the Midas touch, that the king thought was a blessing turned out to be a curse. Now we are using the expression, the Midas touch, in a positive context. When we describe certain people as having the Midas touch, we're actually praising them. It's intended as praise. We're saying that everything they touch turn into gold. Their business prospects turn into gold. Their stores prosper. Their investments increase in value. Their creative works become popular. Everything they touch turn into gold as a good thing. We forget that in the original story, it's the very opposite. The lesson is the very opposite. The original concept was that it's a curse in disguise. What brought about the curse was the king's insatiable appetites for gold, his greed, or his lack of contentment. So we can actually see a very easy correspondence between King Midas to Tao Te Ching, chapter 44. Take a look at this. Line 2, the self or wealth, which is greater. The intangible aspects of the self includes your relationship with other people, your love for others, for the king, his love for his daughter. Wealth, in the case of the king, is gold. He cared for gold more than anything else. So he initially thought that gold was the greatest of all. Later on, he realized no, his love for his girl, his daughter, was the greater of the two. And then line 3, gain or loss, which is more painful. Very good illustration. We assume that a gain in gold or monetary resources will be a good thing, a happy thing. We see in the story of King Midas that it's actually a painful thing. We assume losing the ability to turn everything to gold might be negative. To the king, was actually overwhelmingly positive. It was actually not the painful of the two. And then line 4, excessive love must lead to great spending. What that actually means is that obsessive love must extract a heavy price. So for him, obviously, his obsessive love for gold is what drew the heavy price out of him of almost losing his daughter. So hopefully, as you listen to the story, you were able to discern the underlying pattern and then apply that to your own life. That's what the Tao is all about. If you are able to do that, and the more you study the Tao, the more skillful you become at this ability to discern the underlying patterns. A lot of people ask me, hey, what about the I Ching? And I tell them the I Ching is about the discernment of underlying patterns in life. When you can master that, you've become your own oracle. You become the master of your own destiny. You can design and author your life in whatever way you want. It all begins with the discernment of underlying patterns. Let me illustrate that by comparing the story of King Midas with the story of the horse lover, so you can see how we would pick out those reiterative patterns. So this slide is called the King's Touch, Parallels of East and West. East on the left-hand side, the horse lover, story from Zhuangzi. On the right, King Midas. So on the left, we have the man who loved horses too much. On the right, we have the king who loved gold too much. So we begin to see the parallel. Number 2 is the manifestation of obsession. In the story of the horse lover, we saw that he went overboard in using the best in caring for the stallion. And Zhuangzi described this as, a basket that was a luxurious item, a container made of seashells, using those to contain the horse dropping and urine, going totally overboard. For the king, the manifestation of his obsession was his demand to the god Dionysus to grant him the wish to turn everything into gold, because he must have more. That is the obsession. So that's the commonality between the two. Then, in terms of patterns of the stories, we've got the turning point. The turning point is a pattern where in the horse lover story, he saw this fly that landed on his horse, his beloved horse, so he slapped the fly. That is the turning point. And for the king, the turning point is running around, turning everything into gold. So initially, the horse lover slapping the fly had a sense of satisfaction, like, how dare you touch my horse? This will teach you a lesson. For the king, running around, turning everything into gold, initially had a feeling of satisfaction, like, look at all this gold. I have more gold. But then, number 4 in the pattern, the negative consequence hits. For the horse lover, it was getting kicked by the horse, this powerful kick, dead center, this painful kick. For the king, it's the horror in realizing that, oh no, I have just turned my daughter into a statue. Have I just killed her? Now, in the horse lover story, there's a tragic ending. The horse lover is killed by the powerful kick. The horse doesn't even realize what's going on, goes back to eating. And in the story of King Midas, there's a happy ending, that he was able to pull back from the brink of disaster, had everything go back to the way it was before. This is sort of like in a life pattern where you are able to realize your folly in time, in recognizing that you have neglected, for instance, your health, your family relationships, your connections with good friends, and therefore you stop in time, you pull back from the brink, and you're able to restore and heal those elements that you had neglected before. If so, more power to you. In Greek mythology, King Midas had other manifestations of foolishness. His story actually goes on. So he didn't necessarily have an overwhelmingly positive ending riding off into the sunset. But here, just in the context of the patterns in the two stories, this is where we depart. This is where we basically say that, what if you if you continue on with your obsession, you basically end up suffering from your folly. And then to the right-hand side, if you are able to stop in time, then you can pull back from the brink. There's still hope. And that's actually the great theme for us today, is to stop in time. If you realize that you are heading down the wrong path, and you are able to stop yourself and turn back around. So with that, let's get back to the Tao Te Ching. Line 7, knowing when to stop avoids danger. This is the pulling back part. So this part deserves a lot of attention from us as well. In this last section, the concluding section of 44, Lao Tzu is asking this question: what leads to problems in life? Now, he observed people in his time, and his observation was that troubles usually started when people said, just one more. That is, they did not know when to stop. It is the same in our world. We look around And we notice that troubles usually start when people say that exact same thing. Just one more. Not knowing when to start. So this is the reason why Laozi is focusing on this inability to stop. Tao cultivators learn from real life examples. So our belief is that it's better to quit while you are ahead. In Mandarin, there's a popular expression that means the same thing, 见好就收, quit while you are ahead. Fill your cup short of the rim so you don't overflow the cup and make a mess. This is metaphorical language. It's basically talking about life as a cup, and you're pouring tea into it. You want to stop in time. So there's more. There's quite a bit more about this. So overflowing the cup in this case can serve as a metaphor for danger. And I bring up danger because, as you can see in the translation for line 7, knowing when to stop avoids danger. So I want to address that specifically. When we are in a rush, and this applies to everything, this is no longer just about the chasing after of fame and fortune. This is not about greed necessarily. This is about everything. When we're in a rush, we're not watching where we're going. We can take the wrong step. We can make a mistake, and we can mess things up for ourselves. Overflowing the cup being one way to talk about it. A misstep that causes us to fall into a trap may be another way to talk about it. So in addition, we were talking about contentment, needing to master contentment, not be like King Midas. In addition to that, the sages also want us to master the art of slowing down, to pause for breath, and assess the situation. That's what it means to stop in time, to know when to stop. Now, the sages have said things that use different words, but mean the exact same thing. And therefore, I want to illustrate with one example. Knowing when to stop. Laozi was not the only sage who advocated the goodness of the pause, to stop, look around. Hey, what's going on? Where am I? What should I do? Am I on the right path? Am I making a mistake? Am I about to make a mistake? So there's a book, this is from the Confucian tradition. It's called The Great Learning, 大学. It is specific in this regard. So here's an image of that. This particular cover from a commentary, explanation, annotations on 大学. This is actually commentary on the 4 books, on the 4 classics, of which 大学 is one of them. And this is written, authored by the same master who has also authored the commentary for the Tao Te Ching that I am using. So in 大学, the Great Learning, we see this expression. 知子而后有定. 6 simple characters. Let me break them down for you. The first character means to know. Second character means to stop, knowing when to stop. And then after that, you can have calm. So what does that mean? Let me provide you with the translation. One must know when to stop in order to regain calmness. Think about how this can apply in life, all kinds of situations, the mistakes that you have made when you were trying to hurry through something, when you were in a frantic rush. Countless mistakes that are unnecessary and could have been easily avoided with the simple wisdom. One must know when to stop in order to regain calmness. So now we have completed our initial thought on knowing when to stop. This is a good time for us to take a break. So beyond the great learning, 大学, we should now return to 道德经, chapter 44, to further discuss line 7. Knowing when to stop avoids danger. So here, I want to extend upon the metaphor of the overflowing cup and then talk about a common expression. A common expression in Mandarin in this regard is 八分满. So 3 characters, specifically, literally, they mean, the first character means 8, second character means point, and last character means full. 8-point full, what does that mean? Well, literally, it's 80% full. That is the meaning. So the idea is that as you pour into a cup, don't try to fill it to the very top. Don't try to top it off, but stop at 80%. This idea applies not just to filling a cup, but also extends to all aspects of life. So as an example, when it comes to eating, when it comes to meals, one should never go to 100% fullness. It is actually not a healthy way to go, and it doesn't make you feel good. You feel stuffed, you feel tired, you feel lethargic. So the idea for the Tao cultivator is that when you are having a meal, you stop when you reach 80% full. So there's a lot of, there's actually medical studies on that being the best way to go. For now though, I want to continue on with this idea of knowing when to stop avoids danger. So when we talk about the pursuit of fame and fortune, we can use this to apply to that. As you are pursuing fame and fortune, so for instance, King Midas pursuing getting more gold by having the touch, this applies to that. Knowing when to stop avoids danger. And one thing to note is that when the craving is driven from the ego, it can never be truly satisfied. Literally, it's a bottomless pit. It will always want more. And that too applies everywhere. We know it's certainly true with material things because the acquisition of one thing can easily lead to the acquisition of the next thing. It's an ever-expanding spiral. It's never the acquisition of, for instance, a technology gadget. After the acquisition of that thing, there's accessories, there's upgrades, there's software applications to get for that. And just when you think you are all done, the newer version of the gadget is now available. So you have to restart the cycle all over again. As I said, it's never ending. It's a bottomless pit. So when we talk about this whole idea of one thing leading to something else, in the Tao tradition, there's a story that illustrates this as well. It takes the form of a folk tale as well as a historical account. It is the final chapter for this, it's the final story for this chapter, and I would like to tell you the folk tale. It's called The Ivory Chopsticks. The Chinese characters that you see right at the top of the slide is exactly what that translates to, that, the ivory chopsticks. Here's the story of the ivory chopsticks. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a man living in a small town. He worked hard to make a living. He was diligent. He was reliable in his business dealings. After 20 years of plying his trade, he was finally able to establish his own little store. So his store had a good reputation. His store had a decent amount of business. Therefore, he was able to attain financial stability for himself and his family. He was even able to save up quite a bit of money, more than he ever had before. He had a dream to expand his business, and he was getting close to being able to do that, to make his store the best in town. So overall, things were looking up for him. One day, while he was out traveling on business, he came across a pair of chopsticks. Strangely enough, someone had dropped a pair of chopsticks on the road, out in the middle of nowhere. He picked them up, and he saw that these were no ordinary chopsticks. They were exquisitely crafted from ivory. He had never seen anything like these chopsticks before. He thought, wow, these must have been dropped by accident. Whoever dropped them must be fabulously wealthy. He thought, I've never even heard of anyone who used such rare and precious chopsticks to eat. It's crazy. So, holding the ivory chopsticks, he waited for quite a while, out in the middle of nowhere. But no one came back looking for the chopsticks, so he decided to take them for himself. After all, finders keepers. So when he finally got home, he thought, I have to show these chopsticks to my friends. They would be so amazed and envious. So he set up a table and thought about who among his friends he should invite for dinner. But suddenly he frowned, noticing now the difference between the exquisite ivory chopsticks and his own very basic utensils. The mismatch was glaringly obvious and it bugged him. So he postponed his plans. He thought, well, before I invite my friends over to show off the ivory chopsticks, I need to at least make sure that everything on this table is matching the exquisite quality of the ivory chopsticks. They don't need to be quite as good. They can't be. This is too rare and too amazing, but they should be better than what I have. So he traveled to the nearest city to purchase the finest silverware that could match, that could, not look too bad next to the ivory chopsticks. He found that they were pretty expensive, so he had to dig into his savings, the money that he had set aside for his business. So with the better silverware, he set up the table again. Now the ivory chopsticks no longer looked so out of place. It was simply there among the finely crafted silverware. That was good. But then looking at it, he frowned again. Now he was noticing that the old table and chairs around the table, they looked out of place. So just imagine you've got all this nice silverware and the chopsticks on top of an old table. It wasn't right. Something wasn't right, and it bugged him. He felt that he had no choice but to buy all new high quality table and chairs. This took another week, and it also required quite a bit of money from his savings. So with the new table set up and the matching chairs all around it looking pretty good, the silverware and ivory chopsticks also look good on top of the new table. But now he could not help but notice that the rest of his furniture, everything other than the table and the new chairs, the rest of his furniture looked old and rustic. Now, of course, they have been that way for years. They haven't changed. It's just that he never noticed before. Now he felt he had no choice but to replace all the furniture. This took weeks. He had no time to manage his store, but instead devoted his time in selecting and buying furniture for all the rooms of his house. And for this, he had to dig deeply into his savings. Finally, he got all the furniture to the point that he felt was satisfactory. Looking at them, he thought, okay, this is a satisfactory level of quality. Now everything kind of match. But now the house itself seemed too plain, too run down. He felt he had no choice but to spend even more money to have workers come in to paint every room, to fix up all the old and creaky doors and windows. This took months. Finally, the interior of the house looked great. All the rooms were freshly painted. All the furniture were brand new. But now it was really obvious that the exterior of the house did not match the interior. Oh no, he felt that he had no choice but to use what remained of his savings for the exterior. He did a complete renovation externally. He did a landscaped, beautiful garden around his house. By now, it had been over a year. His savings were completely depleted. His store had no more business due to the neglect, so he had to shut it down. He never got around to inviting his friends either. All of this starting with the ivory chopsticks. So that is the story of the ivory chopsticks. You can see that it's a different kind of story than the Midas touch. But in terms of life patterns, it certainly has similarities. So let's dig into the story in a little more detail to think about the symbology involved. As is the case with most style stories, the chopsticks are symbolic in nature. The chopsticks are not chopsticks. They stand for other things. They can take on the form of many other things in life. What do they represent? Well, they represent the starting point of the slippery slope. Once you get on it, you start to slide because it's slippery. It's not just the one thing, it's the thing that follows the one thing, and it's the next thing that follows the next thing, and then the next, and then the next, and so on. When it comes to material acquisitions, it's just never, okay, just one more. One thing always leads to another, as you have seen in the story of the ivory chopsticks. So notice one thing. Throughout this entire story, the underlying current is I've got to show off these ivory chopsticks to my friends. They would be so amazed and envious. The driving force was always the egocentric thinking about wanting to look good, which is the pursuit of fame. To be known, to attain a degree of fame as the man who owns rare and precious ivory chopsticks. The root cause of problems is ego. And you can also see that this is right in line with what Lao Tzu was saying about not knowing when to stop. When will be the best time to stop? Well, actually at the very beginning. In this particular story, the man never woke up to the reality of his situation, so he never stopped. At every stage, he felt he had no choice but to go on to the next. And this is because as long as the ego desire or craving is present, it will always be a bottomless pit, no exception. The process won't end only when your ability to continue has been destroyed. In the case of the horse lover, it's being killed by the horse. Then the process ends. Or, much less frequently, you awaken to the truth. And what we want to do in studying the Tao is to sharpen, strengthen our ability to awaken to the truth. Now, at the outset, I mentioned that this particular story has a folktale component, which you have just heard, and there is also a historical account that follows the same patterns and that was also based on the same exact symbol. In this case, actual ivory chopsticks. So let me also share that with you. Ivory chopsticks serve a similar role for King Zhou of Shangzhou Wang. He lived approximately 3,000 years ago, so he predated Lao Tzu by centuries. So what happened to him? Here's what the drawing of him looks like. So you can see there. Now, what happened in this historical account is that he flaunted his ivory chopsticks in his court. He showed all his advisors. One of the advisors, who happened to be his uncle, was very wise. Upon seeing the ivory chopsticks, he saw nothing good. He saw behind it everything leading to ruin for the empire. Now, when he expressed his reservation, oh, that's a sure sign we're all doomed. The other advisors disagreed and said, aren't you making something big out of something very little? Those were just, ivory chopsticks. What's that got to do with the destruction of the empire? Well, this wise advisor pointed out the following, and he's got quite a few steps in his reasoning. He said, the ivory chopsticks should not be matched with pottery, but with bowls made of jade. That is escalation number one. Number two, The jade bowl should not contain coarse grains, but the most exotic delicacies. Escalation number 2, and then number 3. The one used to such delicacies will not want to wear plain clothes or live in huts, but would prefer to wear fine silk and live in towers. It doesn't stop there. It goes on. The wise old advisor said, such a ruler would not want to be confined within the borders of the empire, but would send explorers abroad, outside the empire, to seek rare treasures. This right here is a metaphor by itself, meaning the emperor would find all kinds of distractions other than statecraft, other than the proper running and carrying of the empire. Instead, be engaged in frivolous pursuits, like sending explorers out to seek exotic, rare treasures. Number 5. These would all be signs pointing to the decline of the empire, not auspicious at all. Now, the other advisors did not necessarily agree with this. Oh, you're exaggerating. Oh, come on, it's not so bad. Those are the kind of things that we would say, but history proved that the advisor was correct. This particular emperor, Shangzhou Wang, he turned out to be the very last emperor of the Shang dynasty, the Shang dynasty. After that, it broke apart. Another dynasty would then take over. So this is exactly what we're talking about, the danger of not knowing when to stop. So beyond the ivory chopsticks, let's continue and resume and complete our discussion of Tao Te Ching 44. The last line in 44, thus one can endure indefinitely. One can last. Let's talk about that. The Tao is eternal. Therefore, those who live in accordance with the Tao are the ones who last. So I want to be very clear about this, because here Lao Tzu is not talking about overextending your life to more than it should be. Instead, he's actually talking about living your life as you should, to the fullest extent as you should. In the Tao, the observation is that many people live fast and die young. In doing so, they waste their great potential to do worthwhile things in life. And there can be no arguing against that. People who die young when there's still so much for them to do, who knows what they could have accomplished, how they could have still contribute if they had lived instead of dying young. So the right way to live is fully, completely. The right way for you and I to live is the same. It is to enjoy the gift of life to the fullest extent. And this is just as it was always intended by nature, intended by heaven, intended by the Tao. Except, of course, the Tao doesn't really have an intention. This is, but we can definitely claim that this will be the intention of a human being who looks at the goodness and the ability for humans to maximize the life and to make things better for other fellow human beings. So that is the intent. So here we are at the last line of Tao Te Ching 44. We've completed our line-by-line discussion. Therefore, we are ready for the paraphrase. In this paraphrase, we have 3 sections. So I'd like to go through them with you one by one. So remember, the first section is about the comparison of the different concepts, where Laozi is asking the question, which is greater, which is dearer, which is more painful? So how would we paraphrase that? Here's my suggestion. People seem so fixated on the pursuit of fame, but is it as important as the health and well-being of oneself? They seem even more obsessed about the pursuit of material wealth, but is that worth the compromise of one's integrity? The usual assumption is that losing fame and fortune must be painful, but what about the price you pay in gaining them? So as you can see, there's a lot of philosophical discussions around even the paraphrase. The paraphrase itself is already a simplistic distillation of the original lines, which are extremely concise and brief, but that's the gist of it. Let's take a look at the middle section. The middle section, as I mentioned, these are the warnings. These are the warning signs that Laozi wanted to highlight for us to pay attention to. Here's the paraphrase that I would offer. When you become obsessed with something, you invariably must pay a price for the obsession. When you hoard too much of anything, it is inevitable that you will end up suffering some kind of loss, whether through theft or damage. So again, these are penetrating truths. Laozi is saying that if you do XYZ, then ABC must be the consequence. So that is the problem. What is the solution? The solution will be framed as the last part, the last section of chapter 44. And what Laozi is saying is that the twin pillars, knowing contentment, knowing when to stop, these are the ways to live life. These are the solutions. So here is the paraphrase that I want to offer for that. The Tao of contentment is all about knowing that you already possess more than enough, and you already have absolutely everything you need. The Tao of life is also about knowing the right time to stop any endeavor. These may seem like simple ideas, but they will bring joy to your life that you will find fulfilling, constant, and everlasting. So the constant and everlasting part will map to 长久 in the original line. So even though we're paraphrasing, we want to be careful not to lose the original flavor. And now that we're at the very end, remember there's one more thing that we should do, and that is we want to test ourselves to make sure that we understand this enough to tie it back to the beginning. It's not enough just to know what each line means. We have to go full circle to understand the essence of the Tao. So let's take a look at how we can do that. We start with the last lines of Tao Te Ching 44. What does Laozi say? What is Laozi trying to convey with the last line? Well, we can see Laozi is talking about living a long, fulfilling life. You know, the opposite, as I mentioned, of not living fast, dying young, but to live a long, fulfilling life that allows for attainment, that allows for spiritual refinement, that there's time for all that, and yet it is full of joy, it is effortless, it is graceful. So at the bottom right-hand corner, there's the last line, all about living the appropriate amount of years accorded to you. So now we connect this back to the beginning in order to see how to live such a life. Here's the beginning. The 3 lines, these are the comparisons that I mentioned before, where we want to look at the self and the pursuit of fame and fortune to see how they compare with one another. And then we also want to contemplate the gaining and losing of fame and fortune. We want to go beyond what most people think about which one is more painful and be able to reach our own conclusion on that. So here's wrapping back to the beginning. So what is the beginning saying? Well, first of all, it says that we must understand the self is more important than the pursuit of fame or fortune. And then it also says further down that we have to understand the truth about gaining and losing fame and fortune. And loss in the Tao context can be liberating. Now, these are precisely the points that most people are still unable to grasp. When you look upon the world, when you see how most people are, you see that they have only a surface understanding of these ideas. They may say that the self is more important than money or fame, but their actions demonstrate otherwise. Therefore, looking at the world, observing the world, we note that many people, for them, first of all, material wealth and external perception, like reputation, how other people see you, how they judge you, material wealth and external perception mean everything to them. Therefore, their success in terms of assets and reputation are deeply connected, directly connected to their sense of self-worth. Having less would impact their sense of self-worth as well, which would be the opposite of the Tao way of looking at things. Then, this is the reason why they spend an entire lifetime in a frantic chase, paying a heavy price in the process. So this is true of many people, and they serve as counterexamples for us. By seeing how they mess up their lives, we know what not to do. Because they pay a heavy price, this often manifests as a lack of health, a lack of happiness, and in turn, these contribute to cutting short the life they could have lived, but ended up failing to live. So this is the way it is for many people out there in the world, many people that we know and observe every day. So let's complete our discussion on the first circle by talking about how we should live. What is it like for cultivators of the Tao? How would we be different from the many people who don't manage to live life in accordance with the Tao? Cultivators of the Tao realize intangible qualities in life are more important than the tangible objects. For King Midas, love is more important than gold. That would be a good example for us. And also, cultivators of the Tao master the concept of contentment and enjoy a lifetime full of joy. So contentment brings about happiness and joy. It's really an art that we need to master. They also master how to stop and not go too far, so they never overshoot the target. They never make mistakes, take a misstep, fall into a trap. Overall, they live long, fulfilling lives with effortless grace while attaining greatness in everything they do. So that's the difference between Tao cultivators and a lot of people who are the very opposite. This is it for the full circle. I think we are now ready for the summary for our discussion today. Yeah, it went by kind of fast. So this is the summary that you saw before for the first half of our discussion on 44. It was all about contentment and then pausing for a moment, which has been the theme today. So contentment and knowing when to stop will both contribute to us not neglecting the more important things in life. And these, in turn, will go into the summary for our talk today. So this is the second summary, the second and final summary. Now we can see that there are two great principles in this chapter that will guide us in our journey. The first, as you have already seen, is that knowing contentment is the key to living a life full of graceful joy and happiness. So previously, I shared this common expression in Mandarin, 知足常乐. To know contentment is to have everlasting joy in your life. So now let's do its counterpart in today's talk. In today's talk, it's all about knowing when to stop. Why? Because knowing when to stop is the key to skillfully sidestep problems before they occur. And to match the common Mandarin expression that I provided last time, this time I quote 大学, the Great Learning, a Confucian classic. So 知止而后有定. And remember, the literal transcription of that is knowing when to stop, and then you can be calm. You can calmly assess your situation to look at where you are and where you are going next. So the translation I offer for that is the following. One must know when to stop in order to regain calmness. I want to offer these two things as important ideas to live by. That as you go about your business during the week, that you contemplate the importance of contentment, to think about how you already have absolutely everything you need. And also that as you encounter various situations in your life, that you always keep in mind, hey, should I not maybe slow down right now? Take a pause, take a breath, look at the situation with a mental step back to assess the overall perspective. I think you will find that these will be very valuable advice straight from Lao Tzu to you. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.